You hear banks talking about it. You hear other institutions talking about it. You hear schools talking about it. And you also then have like this like kind of, there's like these weird hackers out there. There's this collision of many things that is kind of unavoidable at this point in time. And so yeah, this change is massive. And it's because it's so massive and it's so hard to understand. I think that's why we're all here in the room today. And so part of the purpose of this talk is to help orient you guys in your understanding to recognize that this is a change that's happening that's on the order of impact of something like the invention of the written word or the introduction of a printing press. And I'm like not shitting you. This is a massive thing. And so in a short amount of time, I'm going to kind of walk you guys through how to think about this from a couple of lenses. So let's dive in. The PG version of what's happening is quoted by a guy named Harold Innis, so like an anthropologist in communications. But after a lot of studying across a lot of cultures, he says, the sudden extensions of communication are reflected in cultural disturbances. And I think cultural disturbance puts it really delicately, because you can study the rise and fall of entire empires as a way of tracing the effect of communication media. So that's a very powerful statement. And because I doubt Romans were like, oh, when the fall of the Roman Empire happened, they thought it was a cultural disturbance. I think a more apt way to say this is Alfred North Whitehead. He said, major advances in civilization all but wreck the societies in which they occur. And wreck is much more appropriate, because I think we may be oblivious to the extent of the wreck that is in progress around us because we're in it. And so when you're in something, it's oftentimes really hard to see it and understand it for what it is, because you've been steeped it's like you miss the forest for the trees, the fish doesn't see the water, right? Lots of aphorisms. But also changes of this scale take a lot of time to make landfall. So the introduction of the written word took centuries to really impact things. And the introduction of the printing press, it had impact over 3 or 4 centuries. We'll get into some examples of how and why. But you notice that there's a compression. First it's a couple of centuries, then it's fewer centuries, and now these massive changes happen in a matter of decades. We're kind of at that place where you can have entire civilization-wide destructuring and restructuring, and we're going to be experiencing it over a couple of decade place. And so the fact that it's happening in a couple of decades, you're like, wow, that's less compared to centuries. However, it's still longer than most people tend to think, right? With short attention spans today, and I'm not like saying that, oh, short attention spans are bad, but we tend to get very myopic in our specializations, which makes it challenging to see the broad picture across time, space, multiple disciplines. And so that's the territory we're going to play in today, is we're going to play in multiple discipline territory, and we're also going to play in the long time span territory to get a sense of what this is. So something to note is that things look the same, but they're very different. This is why things are inobvious. The things, and I'm going to draw a little bit just so we have like touch points, but things look the same. So there's a metaphor that is used, and it's an example that I'm probably sure some of you guys know, but it's by Brett Victor, and it's the idea of paper behind glass. Paper behind glass is the idea that when you're looking on your iPhone and you're reading an article, that it's like you used to read paper, but it's now on your device, and it's just paper behind glass. And so there's this slip of like, oh, it's new, but it's also old. But it's really not, it's not old. It just kind of looks that way, because what sits underneath here is a delivery system and a network that you have no idea how many people touch something from Genesis point, the paths it takes to get there, how many people touch it, how it's mutated. And all those things are completely abstracted away and made completely invisible to you. And another principle, as opposed to it just looking the same and being different, is everything that is below makes possible what is above. So a really tangible example is in your web browser, you used to have to type http://www, blah, 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 right? And nobody, like browsers have now abstracted that away. You can just type something.com, and that's great. But the decision at some arbitrary point in time, because of what worked at a physics laboratory, to put http:// to make their file system work, is now this thing that's everywhere. a subtle decision then kind of impacts everything above it. So understanding that is important. So things look the same, very, very different. Even though you don't see it, it's still happening. And then another principle is like ideas, you're going to hear ideas that are so new, they sound idiotic. And that's completely okay. There's a McLuhanism, or Marshall McLuhan, McLuhanisms are like his thing. And some of his lines are really, really good. One of them in particular is, you all know, like in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, or the one-eyed man is king, right? And his was, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is a hallucinating idiot, because he sees the things that nobody else sees. And so there's a distinction to make here of like, you're going to hear a lot of things that sound idiotic, like coming out of this domain. We're going to walk through some of it. And it's very true. But there is a little bit that when you cut through the noise of some of the idiocy, you're like, whoa, there's some brilliance there. And those are going to be the seeds of this shift that are kind of taking place. So like some of the things that, less than 10 years ago are examples of this are digital scarcity. Digital scarcity is the thing that like a guy named Nick Szabo talked about a long time ago. And it's just the idea that you can use computation to make things scarce. And that like when that was postulated, everybody in the society was like, this is a bunch of BS. This is never going to work. Like, how and why would this work? And so you see everybody pushing back. But that's actually what makes the concept of something like Bitcoin work, is digital scarcity. And that's now becoming a norm in the culture. And by norm, I mean like 1/10 of 1% are starting to talk about and accept it. But it's hitting with such force that you can't ignore it. Another one was the idea of a smart contract. Like this verbiage wasn't in the culture 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And if you were to, again, say this in like the year 2000 of like, oh yeah, we're going to have smart contracts where everybody can agree on the state of this thing that distributes assets or tracks assets. And no offense, but it's like code as law, right? And it makes it's an interesting question. But these things that sound idiotic at some point in time are now kind of normal. And so what I'm asking you to do is to just recognize that some of these things that are way out there might not be. And so yeah, I came here for the blockchain. How is this all related? The point is that the blockchain was one of these like idiotic ideas. Like when Bitcoin started happening, and like it was a bunch of gamers like mining these digital coins for like fractions of a cent. And you would talk with people about, hey, this is happening. It's like 2012. This is like neat. And everybody's like, what the hell are you doing? And just fast forward a few years and look where we are right now. You've got countries trying to ban it. You've got banks saying we're not going to touch it, and then buying it on German exchanges the next day once the price crashes. You have these things, and the point is that like the blockchain ideas like this make all these things possible. And so with all of that as kind of the preamble, let's dive in. So today what we're going to do is create kind of like a compass, but this is about like systems design principles. You're all in the design space, and so this is like, hey, this is the bridge we're designing. But what we're going to talk about is the design principles for this emerging world. And right, these can be, take them, leave them. They're not 100% right, but they are. This is based on like, I don't know, I've been in the space for a while, and I'm seeing some of these things, I don't know, they just kind of feel right, even though they feel a little wrong. So actually, with regards to that, I'm going to ask you to, before we step into this territory, it's like, remove your sense, or try to, if you can, let go of your sense of what is right and what is wrong, and because again, many cultures and civilizations and governments were like, this is right and this is wrong. They all go by the wayside eventually. So if you really want to step into the space and play with new concepts and new things, I'm just asking to like, allow yourself to like swim freely. Because this change really doesn't care. The change that's washing ashore doesn't care or hold anything sacred. It doesn't. It's an odd thing to say. So let's free ourselves and kind of step into this. So landmark number one, we're kind of like walking across a landscape, which we'll get to, but it's like, this is kind of where we are or where we have been, and this is where things are going. And down here is always a little breadcrumb that we can talk through. But so this first one is so big. It's like, we're going to use this. It's so throughout history, trusted authorities have been needed for societal scale coordination, organization, communication, and action. So for all the human history that you guys know, it's like you have needed it. You've needed central organizations. You've needed a government. You've needed a bank. You have needed a large institution to coordinate things until now. So everything you were taught, everything in every school, everything has been based on this assumption that you need a trusted third party. And now trusted third parties can be obviated. Yes, trust is still an element of the system. It always will be. You need trust because of humans, right? But trusted authorities and the role they've played for this span of time that is like massive, that has just been interrupted in a way that's not theoretic, and it's not just postulated in papers and in universities, but it's actually making an impact in the culture and in many cultures around the world right now. Like, it's just happening. And so what that is a pointer to that our instincts might mislead us here. The things that we assume need to be there might not be there. This is such a big thing. Like, I'm just like, we could all meditate on this for 5 minutes and just like, this is a big one. And I know everybody says this is big, but like, just think about that and think about that point, and we're at that point right now. That's an interesting thing. And also, when you remove third parties, this is kind of a neat thing. You avoid honeypots, and a honeypot is basically a target of a lot of information that malicious attackers might want to go after. But what's a honeypot anyways, right? So, that's like my one like planned joke. That's good. Okay. So for history, as a result of these systems with trusted third parties, you always needed to ask for permission to play. You've always had to say, so because of, we're now going to make this circle mean the systems of yesterday. So this circle would be governed by an institution, and I would need to ask, hey, can I play? And then somebody would say, yeah, let me just do some KYC on you. Let me know who you are, and I'm going to give you the green light, and then you can step into this ecosystem. And once you're in this ecosystem, everybody is assumed to be a good actor. So participation and whether or not you're malicious is all kind of assumed to be taken care of by this thing. But now you have permission by default. When you remove the authority as a necessity, you just have permission. So there's a generation growing up right now. We'll get into like generation dynamics that has permission by default, and that's already causing a lot of cultural kind of mismatches. So yeah, authority roles are being questioned. Why do I need you? It's a really harsh question, right? But you're seeing it be asked, and the people who it's being asked of are going to be the ones pushing back the hardest, because that's really hard to ask. Why are you relevant? And for you to say, maybe I'm not. Maybe I need to reframe how I operate or what I'm doing. Like, they're questions that are hard. Our third landmark is things have been hard to prove, and it's moving to certain types of things are much easier to prove. And so the joke is like, enough he said, she said, it's more like math said, because we're moving from a space from where it's the difference between like objective and subjective. And there's no longer one person or one organization saying that, this thing right here is the truth. This is the truth, period. No, it's everybody is agreeing on what truth is now. And yeah, it's this version of truth. Everybody agrees. And because we all play in this system, we all have to agree on that thing. That's how consensus is reached. But there are tools that make proof possible in new ways. So shared ledgers, like the blockchain, is one of those things that makes proving things possible. And there are things even below that, like I'm looking at Aaron right now, like engineering in the space of like, there are these things like ZK snarks, which like engineers go really deep on. But it makes proving things possible without having to know things about what you're proving. So you can do these just exotic, not even that exotic, but you can prove something without knowing what it is that you proved, but you knew you proved it. And so that makes interactions between parties who don't want to share information, but they want to be sure that they took some kind of an action. That makes those interactions possible now. Again, they've never been possible throughout that entire timeline up until now. So this idea of things moving toward easy to prove, massive, massive shift. What is this next one? Yeah, this is fun. Information used to primarily move in one direction. And so moving in one direction, it often looked like this, right? We've had many structures that kind of represent, it's a type of one-dimensional movement where a decision and a direction is made and then passed down. But in what we're talking about, information is now easily moving in all directions because there is no top. What's happening is we're moving from a certain type of organized structure into a network. The idea of a network is something that is starting to become a part of the culture. And we've seen its power with a couple of non-network networks like Facebook and things like that. But how networks kind of permeate into culture as a result of these changes are changing things. So yeah, it's top-down is kind of hard when there's no top. It's just a topology. So yeah, so wide-reaching communication channels have historically been very expensive, but now wide-reaching communication channels are extremely cheap. You can reach billions for almost nothing. And there are a lot of implications there, but the one I wanted to bring up, which is going to be kind of fun to have some dialogue with, is the idea that popular and unpopular ideas now play side by side. Because when you have communication channels to reach people that are expensive, you push certain ideas through them. And they're usually the ideas that are agreed upon by the culture because that's the narrative of the culture. However, when wide-reaching communication channels are cheap, many ideas can be propagated through many channels to reach lots of people. And those ideas are not all going to be of one flavor or variety. And so that means you're going to be having polar opposites sitting right side by side. And we're living in the era of the start of that. And so the idea of what is true and what is not true and what is real and what is fake, that's the language people are trying to put to this network shift that is happening, which makes all types of information available to all types of people. And it's up to you, it's up to the people in the network or the actors in the network to decide what is the truth or what is the meaning you're going to make from all this information. As opposed to somebody making the meaning and passing it to you, we're now left to our own devices to make sense of things in this way, which, like it or hate it, it kind of puts the onus on us to take some action to make sense of things. So slightly different than the way it's been. Yeah, and again, so that other one kind of leads into this one, which is few easily controlled channels trusted by a majority of society to many uncensorable channels trusted by only the relevant parties. You go to your watering holes for the news that you go to the trusted watering holes, you all do, for news that you trust. You have sources that you believe are true and right to some extent of your belief system, and you go to those places because you can. Whereas, 100 years ago, there were far fewer of those, and it was much, much more tight. So, the idea of uncensorable. So the tools that are also becoming a part of these emerging networks are allowing people to communicate in ways that are uncensorable. It's just pervasive. It moves in things, through things, and around things that used to be structures that were, a wall. So that's happening. And okay, this is one kind of fun example, but it's like Innes had a really good, a good statement about change has always kind of come from the margins. And so what happens is there's a main communication medium that's used to distribute the message of the day. And on the margins of the culture, new communication media start to pop up. And those communication media allow them to kind of organize, and ultimately that's kind of what becomes the power dynamic struggle in any given culture over time, is that those two communication mediums are used to distribute new ideas, which then leads to the downfall of an entire culture. So an example of this was in the Catholic Empire. Latin was written on parchment, and that was how ideas were distributed. But once paper, literally paper, started to migrate into that region, the secular vernacular of any area was what was used. And over time, that allowed people and essentially the idea of nationalism grew out of competing ideas. And like the introduction of paper was what allowed people to write in their native language to compete with Latin and parchment. Like very simple things. But what we have here is similar. Like instead of just going to major websites, you have tons of websites, many of which are, I don't know, you just have this proliferation of things in this new medium. So anyways, that's kind of what's happening. And in terms of authority symbols, not just roles, but the symbols are also being questioned. Like I have nephews right now who kind of like they laugh at the nightly news. The nightly news is kind of a joke to them. And that's interesting, right? The source of truth for an entire generation is the joke to the next. And that's interesting. This is more fun than negative. Sorry if this is kind of like, oh shit, like there's some of this, and all of this leads to like the emergence of new possibilities. So that's why I'm like crazy inspired by it, even though a little of it sometimes feels heavy. That's where, as designers and engineers and makers, actually just makers as humans, to have an understanding of this and to go swim in these waters and not be scared of the deep. It's fun. So the hierarchical structure, yeah, leadership used to be kind of based on hierarchical structures based on, I'll just say it, hierarchical leadership based on old structure is what used to be. But here we have, and we're seeing emergent leadership based on the current needs. And so what that means is different people leading at different times. Two really good examples here. First of which is this guy, John Seeley Brown. John Seeley Brown, you guys have all heard of Xerox PARC, right? The Idea Factory, amazing people. Well, John was the guy who put that place together. He recruited and brought in Alan Kayes, and he put that together and then orchestrated how this organism would run and spit out amazing things. And so once Seeley Brown left, he's been doing a lot of different things, but most recently he's been working with kids. And one of the interesting things he started learning with a bunch of children were he was watching kids play World of Warcraft. And what he learned was that kids between like 9 and 13 years old had entire ecosystems and collective groups that would manage these raids, and where you would expect there to be leadership of like the ones who are like the most powerful or whatever. I don't play the game, but like what you would expect as like the ones that might be perceived as weaker, or the ones that might be like more magic or stronger, and you'd go, oh, that's probably the leadership group, right? That's not the case. What happened was emergent leadership based on the structure of the raid or the game or the level that they were in. Different subgroups emerged to take the role of leader at any given point in time. And it was like amorphous, but what held them together was like this I've used this before with like describing the CoLab actually. It's like this loose magnetic sense of direction and purpose that kind of lets this whole thing move, and whoever needs to step up does step up. And so that's very different. And again, that's enabled by some of these tools that we just talked about, which lay the foundation for these new types of leadership structures. And then another one is this already happens in nature. It's kind of fun. But there was I forget what his name was, but he was watching deer, and everybody had thought that like in animal, or like deer and elk, like herd cultures, that like it was the bucks or like the big males who were like, hey, like I decide things. And right? It's like naturally. And what happened was he was watching how herds of deer would move to their next water source. And so at some point they'd be laying in a field or some plain, and one deer, could be a doe, could be a fawn, could be a buck, would pick up its head and point. And it would point its head in the direction of a water source. And then at some other point, another deer would point, and maybe it's pointing it to another water source or the same one. But anyways, this would happen over the course of a couple of minutes or an hour. And once roughly almost to the point of like 51% of like agreement was reached, the herd would get up and just kind of like go to the water source. And it was oftentimes the like big buck was kind of the last one who was like, oh, I should go. Like, so that was unexpected and interesting. So this next one, a controlled flow of predictable information is where we kind of used to go. You used to be able to like, you'd print things out, you'd say, yeah, this is how it's going to go, and here's how we're going to distribute it. It's going to be on these dates and times. But now we have the free flow of all types of information, which is kind of based on some of those things we've been talking about. But the free flow of all types leads to lots of things. And so what the footnote here is that for everybody who's making things, is that generalized and open tools are wildly powerful. Like ideas without ideology, things like TCP and IP, they have no politics and they have no agenda. It's just a general open tool. Use it as you will. Like, just make something that can be used by many people. Like, there's a powerful statement there. And so that the free flow of things is actually, that's kind of why I'm in it, is I like that. So this is one of my favorites. This one is limited ways to express ideas widely, and we're moving into unlimited ways to express ideas widely. And so there's a point here that I kind of want to, it's illiteracy is something that it's like a concern at this point. So we are awash in like the tools to allow you to express. So everybody has like a phone on them or a computer or something. Like, yeah, right? Like you're using it. So am I. We have these things around us, and we know how to kind of use them, but we don't really know how to use them. It's the equivalent of like if I had books and I could read the book, but I didn't know how to write. Almost. That's the thing. It's like you can. So it's like there's a type of cultural illiteracy that concerns me, and so as tool makers and makers, we need to, it's on us to make the ability to write and make in this medium, the technical medium, possible for everybody. Because when everybody's using the thing that they think is old because it looks like the old thing, but really it's completely new, the delivery network and everything that takes to like get there, and it's also hard to express yourself. Like if we were just talking, I was to say, go make a web app, or go make an app that people can use to do X, Y, and Z. Like, what do? You like raise money, or you go talk to an engineer and like they build a thing and it takes months. Expression in this space is still hard. It's really hard, and it's not finished yet. So being able to move in this direction more and more continually, we're going to see, but also this is kind of a call to action for everybody who's making things. Expression is still really shitty. It just is. And so we're seeing better things, but expression is still limited to some of the tools that are out there that are largely used. And the like 10th landmark or like movement here is that benefits from outdated and fragile structures that used to be realized by a few are now moving into flexible emerging structures, and the benefits are realized by a lot of people because the flexibility of the structure and the way and the speed with which you can build these new structures and networks allows you to capture value as things move through the system. So you no longer have to like take time and like stand up this thing, and then because you stood this massive structure up with time and money, and then you're just going to sit back and capture the rewards long after you've been repaid, or long after the structure has like served its purpose. Now you have the ability for these things to kind of sprinkle in. Networks make a lot of things possible. You can sprinkle in new types of structures where many participants can play, and you can capture benefits just with new ways of sending and receiving value. And so, yeah, benefits can be captured by many. And yeah, the flexibility of structures. So, yeah, so that's a lot of stuff we just walked through. It's a lot. Those are like 10 principles of what was and what looks like it's kind of happening, and we're already seeing it. Those are all big. Each one of those things to me feels like, how am I living at this time? Like, this is kind of an amazing time, and it's been happening. This is not, and it's all happening right now, yes, but it's not like it just like happened in the last 5 years. Here we are. No, this goes back to like 60s and 70s and actually 40s to now, right? It's like a 100-year kind of change, but like, why is all this stuff like landing now? Because you can feel it. Like you just know it's happening now because every one of like, I would be surprised, but almost every one of the clients that you're working with kind of knows that there's a change happening. They're asking questions to like help make me relevant in these conversations. Help make me a part of the conversation. The conversation like wasn't even a thing 10 years ago. There was just like, here's my message, and we're gonna like create this image. Conversation has emerged. There's lots of these things, and so everybody is feeling that now is this like kind of there's something happening right now, and like my feeling is that it takes a generation growing up with new expectations. So like the kids who are now like in grade school, high school, in that they're the ones growing up in this space. And everybody who's like 20s and kind of 30s, like we're on the edge of that. But the ones who are just younger have completely different expectations of what the system does for them. And the ones who are like 20s and 30s now, who are creating these kind of, if you look at across a lot of these projects that are like doing these things, it's on the younger end. not crazy young, because some of them are advised by like 50s, 60s, but like basically you have generations growing up with where they're thinking thoughts germane to this new medium. All their ideas, all their things that they've kind of been taught in school have been tested against what they have access to, which is open, distributed, I can reach around the globe. Like, all these things are called into question by a generation. And so this is causing a lot of discomfort. Like, the thing about needing to ask for permission and ask for access, that's like, I think we're seeing some of that friction in like, you have a generation that goes, oh, these youth today are entitled. They think they just get everything. And yeah, they do think they have access to everything, because they do. Like, the world that they've grown up into, they have access to everything. They need to ask nobody for anything. They just step in and do, or they don't do. But either way, they have their choice, whereas choice wasn't a thing a little while back. And so all these things happening right now are because of the confluence of like the internet and the connectivity that it gave us, and then the usage of that, like wide use and widespread adoption. That's all kind of happened in the last 20, 25 years. And so we're seeing the first like generation kind of move in, which is, it's creating this thing like right now, which is interesting. And like, compare that to the printing press, right? You had like, hold on, I have the date here. Yeah, 1440 roughly, but that's like the printing press, and it takes like 300 plus years to get to like an assertion of the Bill of Rights and the freedom of printing press. That takes a long time to make that jump culturally and cognitively for an entire like multiple societies to get there. And so we're seeing it in a very compressed fashion here over like 50 years, and now in this 20-year span into like today, yeah, it's happening. So yeah, this is kind of fun. Let's explore how. So I feel like we should, like, the wrapping of like, how do you walk through this territory? So one of the ways that we're doing this, and there's tons of ways to explore this space, tons. At the CoLab, we're creating a distributed web named TBD. We're creating this research group that's designed explicitly to traverse this territory. And we're doing it with like 3 things. And so the 3 things are participation, contribution, and governance. So those are like 3 areas that we're thinking about. And specifically, so like participation means Gesundheit. Participation means running nodes in these networks. Like, all of these things springing up have network participants, right? To make this thing, you need actors in different places around the world, and then you need to connect them, in different ways. And so participating means that you're going to actively participate. You're going to run nodes, and you're going to learn what it means to be an actor in this system. And so, yeah, we're going to run nodes in it's like, it'd be like back in the day, you're like, we're going to be one of the first Bitcoin miners. And through mining Bitcoins, like in 2012, you'd say, well, shit, I need GPUs, and I need a lot of GPUs, and then I want like not just one machine, but I want 20. And then, whoa, this is an economy. Like, I should have like decks and rows of these things. And that's going to happen with lots of these networks. Like, there's one that's Filecoin, and it's about file storage, and it's going to start out very, very small. Like, they raised a lot of money, but you're going to hear this like, but distributed file storage is going to completely turn things over in one domain. So yeah, we're going to participate. On the second one is contribution. Contribution is a big piece of this ecosystem. So where in the past you used to just bring money, you would say, I want this thing to scale. I want to play in this system, so I'm going to bring money into this ecosystem. And that's no longer good enough, at least when playing with these rules and trying to understand. So contribution means understanding not just the network itself, but understanding the code and how these things work, because there's a lot of changes taking place, and so we're going to be contributing on the like core library level, and also be able to contribute kind of at the tool level right above the core libraries, if it makes sense. And then you can see your way into new business models and new applications of those things. And so, and again, and it's also agnostic. It's agnostic to like Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of these other names you hear. There's a lot of dogma in this culture already, like people, because there's finance tied up with it. Finance and ego create a very strong bond with one another, and once people are out in the public and they've got their financial incentive tied into it, holy shit, watch the sparks fly, because now you're not hiding these conversations in a boardroom of a company, they're out there on Twitter, and that's a new dynamic. So it seems a little toxic, and some of it is, but I feel like there's a very needed space for a group to see into new business models and to play across multiple ecologies. And so that's what we're going to do. And then the last one is governance, because there's actually I was talking with Santi about this. Yeah, there's a difference between the governance of the code and using governance as code. Like, code that governs is one thing, but what are the rules and what are the games that you play to allow updates to that code which is enforced? So governance of the code and governance as the code is something that we're going to be exploring. Governance is something that it's not taking the front seat of any of the dialogue online right now, but if you're playing in the space, you can just see it. It's a huge thing. Governance and understanding how it changes, because it removes boundaries and borders and all sorts of things. So yeah, participation, contribution, governance, that's kind of what we're going to be doing. And also like service. So like, that's not one of the things, but this is like me volunteering. As we do more things and explore, like we're going deep here. Like this is a big change, and so like use us, whatever we're doing. Like we're here to like share what we're learning. So if we're like across the street, doesn't matter. This is a shift that's starting to like, it's unavoidable in any domain, just as writing was. It will shake into everything. Like just mark my words, everything. And I know that's like oh hey, this is a big change. No, this is happening everywhere. Like take a mental snapshot like right now. Like remember this conversation. Close your eyes and remember it. And I want you to fast forward to like just remind yourself in 5 years to think back on this day and think about how much the ecosystem has changed. Just as you could have done it back in but in 5 years it's going to be really quick and a lot bigger.